The first night I realized how thin the walls of an RV really are, I was already parked somewhere I shouldn't have stayed after dark. My name is Marcus Hale. I was 38 years old when this happened, born and raised in northern Arizona, the kind of place where you grow up learning that silence in the desert is never empty. I'd been living out of my Class C RV for almost 3 years by then. Solo, deliberately off-grid when I could manage it, chasing that stripped-down freedom people like to romanticize. The idea that if you take enough roads and sleep under enough open skies, the noise in your head eventually goes quiet. That trip, I was camped outside of Anza Borrego Desert State Park in Southern California. Not in the official campground. I'd pulled off onto a wide wash road about 7 miles from the nearest ranger station, a place that didn't show up clearly on my GPS but felt familiar enough. Packed dirt, scattered ocotillo, a sky that looked too big to be owned by anyone. I told myself I chose that spot because it was peaceful. The truth was simpler. I didn't want neighbors. I'd driven most of the day, dashboard camera running like it always did, not for content, not for paranoia, but because long ago a hit-and-run outside Flagstaff taught me that memories lie when pressure hits. Cameras don't. The dashcam faced forward through the windshield, infrared enabled for night recording, wired directly into the RV's auxiliary battery. Once I parked and leveled out, I forgot about it completely. That's important to understand. Nothing about that night felt staged or dramatic while I was living it. At first, it was just quiet, the kind that presses gently against your ears until you notice your own breathing. The desert cools fast after sunset, and by 9, the air had dropped enough that I pulled on a hoodie and sat outside for a while, letting my dinner settle. No wind, no insects, no distant highway noise, just the faint ticking of my engine cooling down. That should have been the first warning. By 10, I was inside, lights low, scrolling aimlessly on my phone. I remember noticing the smell, dust and something faintly metallic, old rain on hot rock, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. I chalked it up to the desert doing what deserts do, shifting temperature and releasing whatever it had been holding. Around 11, I heard a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't loud. That's what made it worse, a soft knock. Not on the door, on the side panel near the rear wheel well. Just once. I froze, phone screen glowing in my hand. I waited for my brain to explain it away. Expansion noise, a rock settling, maybe a coyote brushing past. Then it happened again. 2 knocks this time. Slow, deliberate. I stood up without thinking, heart already picking up speed, and strained to listen. My RV was parked with the cab facing the open wash, rear toward a low ridge. If someone was back there, they'd have to walk around the entire vehicle to get to the door. I hadn't heard footsteps. No crunch of gravel, no shuffle. I told myself not to be stupid. I told myself people didn't wander out here at night unless they were lost or in trouble. I told myself I was armed with nothing more than a flashlight and a bad imagination. Then came the third sound. A scrape. Longer, like fingers dragging lightly across fiberglass. That was the moment denial started to crack. I moved quietly to the front cab and peered out through the windshield. The dashcam's small red LED blinked steadily, recording. Beyond the glass, the desert lay empty under moonlight. No movement. No silhouettes, just pale sand and jagged shadows. I stood there longer than I want to admit, listening to my own pulse, convincing myself that whatever it was had moved on. Eventually, exhaustion won. Fear doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just wears you down until sleep feels safer than vigilance. I locked the door, checked it twice, crawled into the overcab bunk and pulled the curtain closed. Sleep came in pieces. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of breathing. Not mine. At first, I thought it was a dream bleeding into consciousness. The human brain is good at that, dragging fragments across the border when you're half awake, but this breathing had rhythm, weight, a slight wetness to it, like air passing through something too close to your ear. I held my breath. The sound continued. It was coming from below, near the cab, somewhere just beyond the thin wall separating me from the driver's seat. I reached for my flashlight, fingers shaking enough that I nearly dropped it. When I clicked it on, the beam cut through the bunk's darkness, showing nothing but blankets and the curved ceiling. The breathing stopped instantly. Silence rushed in to fill the space, louder than the sound had been. I stayed like that for a long time, light trained on the cab curtain, waiting for something, anything to confirm I wasn't alone. My mind raced through scenarios. Animal? Unlikely. Too steady. Too close. A person? How would they get inside without making noise? That was when I heard the door handle. It didn't rattle. It turned slowly, testing resistance. The lock held. A quiet exhale followed, frustrated, almost thoughtful. I didn't move. I didn't shout. Every instinct screamed at me to make noise, to assert presence, but something deeper told me that whatever was on the other side already knew I was there. The fear shifted then, from confusion to dread, as I realized this wasn't random. This wasn't someone stumbling onto my campsite. This was someone, or something, that had been watching. The handle turned again, harder this time. The RV rocked slightly, weight shifting near the front tire. A shadow passed across the windshield, blocking the moonlight for just a second. Then it was gone. No footsteps retreating, no engine starting, just absence. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, the desert looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Beautiful, empty, innocent. I stepped outside, scanning the ground for tracks. There were none. No footprints, no scuffs, nothing near the door, nothing near the rear panel where I'd heard the knocking. I told myself I'd imagined it, that fear had filled in the blanks, that the desert had played tricks on my senses. I packed up and drove out before the sun climbed too high. It wasn't until that evening, parked safely at a busy RV park outside Palm Springs, that curiosity got the better of me. I remembered the dash cam, remembered it had been running all night. I almost didn't review the footage, but some part of me needed proof, either that I was losing my grip or that my fear had been justified. I loaded the file, fast-forwarded through hours of stillness, watched the moon crawl across the windshield. Then, at 12:47 a.m., the screen changed. The infrared picked up movement. A shape emerged at the edge of the frame, tall and thin, resolving slowly as it stepped into view. It stood just beyond the headlights, head tilted, as if studying the RV. The camera caught no facial features, only a darker void where a face should have been. It took one step closer, then another. And that was when it reached out toward the door. I paused the footage right there, finger hovering over the trackpad, because my body reacted before my mind could catch up. A tightness in my chest, a heat behind my eyes. The kind of instinctive response you get when something you've only felt internally suddenly exists outside of you, undeniable and recorded. I rewound it, played it again. The timestamp glowed calmly in the corner of the screen, 12:47 3 a.m., while the figure stepped into view with a patience that unsettled me more than any sudden movement could have. It didn't rush. It didn't stumble. It moved like it already knew exactly where the RV was, exactly how far it needed to go. I slowed the playback frame by frame. The infrared washed the desert in flat gray tones, but the figure absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. Taller than I'd expected, at least 6 feet, maybe more. Its arms hung too straight at its sides, fingers long enough that they seemed to reach past where knees should have been. No visible clothing seams, no gear, no reflective surfaces, just a solid silhouette where a person should have been broken up by detail. When it tilted its head, I felt it in my own neck, an involuntary mirror of the motion. The angle was wrong, too far to the side, like it was listening for something inside the RV rather than looking at it. At 12:47:19, it stepped closer. The dashcam picked up the subtle shift in suspension as weight transferred near the front tire. That explained the rocking I'd felt. That explained how close it had been when I was lying awake, counting breaths that weren't mine. At 12:31, it reached out. I zoomed in, heart hammering. The hand came into clearer focus, and that was where denial finally died. The fingers bent the wrong way. Not broken, not injured. Just wrong. Too many joints, Too much flexibility. They curled around the door handle with an intimacy that made my stomach turn. The handle turned. The lock held. I remembered that moment now with sick clarity. The pressure, the quiet test, the pause afterward. On screen, the figure leaned in, face nearing the glass of the driver's side window. The infrared couldn't capture features, but it didn't need to. The way it lingered there, unmoving, told me everything I needed to know. It was listening. At 12:48:2, it exhaled. The dashcam microphone picked it up faintly, a wet, controlled sound that sent a shiver through me even in the safety of a crowded RV park with laughter drifting in from neighboring sites. That breath had been inches from my head while I lay frozen in the bunk, flashlight clenched like a talisman. Then the figure did something I hadn't noticed before. It smiled. Not with a mouth I could see, but with a subtle change in posture. A lift. A satisfaction that radiated through the screen, as if the resistance of the lock had been information, not an obstacle. At 12:48:15, it stepped back, not retreating, repositioning. It moved out of frame toward the passenger side, disappearing from view. I fast-forwarded, pulse racing, waiting for it to reappear. It never did. The rest of the footage showed nothing but stillness until dawn. I sat back, hands shaking, and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I ran through every rational explanation I could think of. A person in dark clothing, a prank, a trick of infrared contrast, but none of it accounted for the movement, the posture, the fingers. And none of it accounted for one final detail I hadn't noticed until I zoomed all the way in. As the figure leaned toward the window, just before it stepped away, the glass fogged from the inside. I replayed that moment again and again, watching the faint bloom of condensation spread outward from where its face must have been. It wasn't breathing cold air onto warm glass. It was reacting to heat, to me, to the warmth of a human body pressed close on the other side. The realization shifted something deep in my chest. This wasn't about theft or curiosity or some random encounter in the wilderness. This was about proximity. I didn't sleep much that night in Palm Springs. Every sound, every footstep, every passing car set my nerves humming. By morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I went back, not to the exact same spot. I wasn't reckless enough for that, but close enough that the terrain matched, close enough that whatever had found me before might notice my presence again. I told myself I needed closure, proof, control. The truth was darker. Some part of me needed to know if this thing was tied to the place or to me. I drove back out toward Anza Borrego in the early afternoon, sunlight bleaching the desert into harsh clarity. Everything looked harmless in daylight. The wash road, the ridge, the open sky. I parked farther from the ridge this time, nose angled toward an easy exit, engine ready. I didn't plan to stay overnight. I walked the area slowly, scanning for signs I might have missed before. Tracks. Disturbed soil. Anything. There was nothing. The ground was hard-packed and unforgiving, the kind that keeps its secrets unless you know exactly where to look. As the sun dropped lower, the air cooled again, and with it came that same smell, dust and metal and something faintly sour. My skin prickled. The environment pressed in on me, not with noise, but with anticipation, like a held breath. At dusk, I heard a knock. Not on the RV. On my own sense of certainty. The sound came from the ridge this time, a single hollow tap, like wood striking stone. Then another. Slower, measured, answering the rhythm of my pulse. I stood frozen beside the RV, keys clenched in my fist, every instinct screaming at me to leave. The sound stopped. Silence stretched. I waited, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the darkening slope. Nothing moved. That was when I understood the lesson I'd been refusing to learn. The wilderness doesn't always chase you. Sometimes it waits to see if you'll chase it. I got in the RV and drove away without looking back. That night, parked under bright lights and surrounded by people, I reviewed the dashcam footage one last time. I copied it, backed it up, burned it onto a drive I keep locked away, not to share, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to remind myself. Out there, beyond the thin walls and the comforting hum of civilization, safety is a temporary illusion. Locks buy you time. Cameras buy you truth. Instincts buy you survival if you listen to them. I still camp. I still chase quiet places and open skies, but I don't ignore the feeling of being watched anymore. I don't stay when the silence feels too intentional, and I never ever forget that night when a shadow tested my door, smiled at my fear, and walked away knowing exactly where to find me again if I ever forgot what it taught me. For weeks after that second trip, I told myself it was over, that leaving when I did had closed a door I didn't want opened. Life has a way of rewarding those lies with just enough normalcy to make them believable. Miles rolled by, new campsites, new mornings where the world looked harmless again. But the thing about footage is that it doesn't forget, even when you try to. 2 months later, somewhere outside Moab, I was reviewing routine dashcam clips, deleting corrupted files, clearing space, when I noticed something that didn't belong, a timestamp I didn't recognize, a location I knew too well. Anza Borrego, 12:49 a.m. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The clip was only 12 seconds long, 12 seconds that felt heavier than the entire night I'd survived. The view was the same wash road, same angle, same ridge, but this time the RV wasn't there. The camera was. It stood alone on the dirt, positioned at windshield height, facing where my RV had once been parked. I watched the footage play out in silence. At the 7-second mark, the figure entered the frame. It approached the camera directly, no hesitation, no need to search. It stopped inches from the lens, close enough that the infrared bloomed into static around its outline. The shape leaned forward, head tilting with that same wrong angle I'd felt in my bones before. Then, very slowly, it raised one hand. The fingers unfolded, joint by joint, until the palm faced the camera. For a moment, I thought it was waving. It wasn't. It was counting. One finger curled in, then another, then another. At the final second, with one finger left extended, it leaned closer still. The microphone caught a sound, not a breath this time, but something lower. A vibration that rattled through the speaker and settled deep in my chest. The screen went black. I sat there long after the clip ended, RV idling softly around me, the red desert glowing through the windshield. I understood then what I hadn't wanted to admit before. That night in Anza Borrego hadn't been an intrusion. It had been an introduction. Whatever that presence was, it wasn't bound to a campsite. It wasn't territorial in the way animals are. It learned. It waited. It tested boundaries, not just of locks and doors, but of people. How far they'd push into places where they didn't belong, how quickly they'd rationalize danger to preserve comfort. And I had passed its test by coming back. That was the real lesson. Not that the wilderness is dangerous, everyone knows that, but that danger doesn't always announce itself with teeth and claws. Sometimes it stands just outside your door, patient, curious, learning the shape of your fear. I don't camp off-grid anymore unless there's a clear line of retreat. I don't ignore knocks, no matter how soft, and I never assume that being alone means being unseen. Because the RV is not a fortress. It's a pause, a thin-walled agreement between you and the world outside, one that can be broken the moment you forget how exposed you really are. That dash cam still runs every night, and every time I lock the door, I remember the figure that smiled when it failed because it wasn't trying to get in. It was making sure I understood how easy it would be if it ever decided to try again. I remember the sign before I remember the canyon. It was bolted to a temporary barricade made of orange steel and splintered wood, the kind the state uses when they don't want you asking questions. The letters were black, all caps, stamped instead of printed. Exit closed indefinitely. No detour arrow. No dates, no explanation. Just the wind pushing dust against the metal like something breathing on it. I was towing my old Volkswagen Rialta down the Snake River corridor, chasing one last stretch of quiet before winter. Hell's Canyon had always been a blank spot on my personal map. Too remote, too steep, too complicated. That usually meant empty. Empty meant safe, or at least predictable. The GPS didn't acknowledge the sign. It kept insisting the road was open, a pale blue line slipping confidently between cliffs. When I slowed, the screen flickered with static, then corrected itself like it had blinked. I told myself it was outdated data. Rural Idaho has a way of shrugging off satellites. I moved the barricade just enough to squeeze through. The canyon swallowed sound differently than I expected. The river below wasn't loud. It hissed, low and constant, like air leaking from a tire somewhere I couldn't see. The walls rose fast, basalt stacked in dark ribs, the road narrowing into something that felt temporary, like it had been pressed into place and forgotten. After 10 miles, I passed the first turnout. There was a pull-off, wide enough for 2 vehicles, with a rusted picnic table and a fire ring choked with weeds. No trash, no footprints. The table had something carved into it. Not a name, not initials, just a symbol. A rough circle with a vertical line through it, uneven, like it had been scratched in with a screwdriver. I felt a strange recognition tug at me, like deja vu without the memory attached. I had the sense I'd seen it somewhere else. A notebook margin, a forum avatar, a road sign I'd passed too fast to read. I took a photo. When I checked my phone later, it wasn't there. I parked anyway. The canyon light was wrong in the afternoon. The sun should have been overhead, bleaching the rocks. Instead, everything looked filtered, dimmed slightly, as if a cloud was passing. But the sky above the rim was clean and sharp blue. When I stepped out of the RV, the smell hit me first. Cold iron and sage, wet stone, even though the ground was dry. The Rialto's engine ticked as it cooled, each sound echoing once, twice, then stopping abruptly like something had swallowed the rest. I stood there longer than necessary, keys in my hand, listening. Somewhere downriver, I thought I heard a voice. Not words. Just the cadence of speech carried by wind, rising, falling, pausing where punctuation would be. When I strained to hear it, it flattened into wind again. I told myself it was water over rocks. That night, the static started. The Rialto's radio had always been finicky. Old wiring, old speakers. I turned it on for background noise while I cooked, and instead of music, I got low static threaded with something rhythmic underneath. Not a beat, a pattern, like tapping, spaced unevenly. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, long pause. I reached to turn it off. The static cut instantly, leaving the RV unnaturally quiet. Too quiet. No insects, no birds settling. Even the river seemed muted, like someone had turned it down. I slept poorly. Every time I drifted, I felt the temperature drop suddenly, sharp and localized, like cold fingers brushing my neck. I'd jerk awake, breath fogging in the dark, then watch it fade. At some point near dawn, there was a knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm enough to sound intentional. 3 knocks. I lay frozen, listening to my heart pound against the thin mattress. The knock came again, same rhythm, same pressure. Human. I checked the time. 4:12 a.m. I didn't answer. After the 3rd sequence, something scraped lightly along the side of the RV. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging their nails or a stick along the aluminum paneling, testing the sound. Then nothing. Morning came thin and pale. The canyon held onto shadow like it didn't want to let the day in. I stepped outside and saw no footprints, no marks. The ground around the RV was untouched dust and gravel, except for the picnic table. The symbol had been recarved, deeper now, the lines straightened, the circle cleaner, as if someone had taken their time. I packed up faster than I meant to. When I drove back toward the exit, the road looked wrong. Not blocked, just unfamiliar. The bends didn't match my memory from the day before. The canyon walls leaned closer, compressing the road into a narrow ribbon. My GPS recalculated repeatedly, the blue line jittering, redrawing itself over and over. Then the screen went blank. No signal. I rounded a corner and saw the sign again. Exit closed indefinitely. Same barricade, same bolts, same scratches. But this time there was something else wired to it. A laminated notice, sun-faded, curling at the edges. I got out to read it. It looked like a photocopy of a photocopy. A ranger bulletin, maybe. Most of the text was smeared or missing, but one line was still legible near the bottom. If you hear your name, do not respond. There was a date at the top, 10 years old. As I stood there, the wind picked up, and for a moment, just a moment, I smelled cold iron again, and beneath it, something electrical. Ozone, like overheated wires. From deeper in the canyon, the static returned. Not from the radio this time, from the air. I felt it vibrate faintly in my teeth, in my skull, like a distant transmission trying to tune itself to me. Then, carried on the wind, threaded through the hiss, I heard a voice shape itself into something almost familiar, almost my own. I got back into the RV and turned the key. The engine hesitated before turning over, a sluggish grind that felt louder than it should have in the tight walls of the canyon. When it finally caught, the sound didn't echo the way I expected. It flattened, absorbed, as if the canyon had learned the shape of my vehicle and decided it didn't need to repeat it back to me anymore. I didn't move the barricade this time. I told myself it was because I'd noticed a wider turnout just past the bend behind me, a place I could turn around safely. That explanation sat better than admitting the truth, that the laminated notice had rattled something loose in me, that the idea of pushing past a sign that old, that deliberate, suddenly felt less like confidence and more like consent. As I eased the RV forward, the radio crackled on its own. No music, no station ID, just static, and underneath it, that same uneven pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. I slapped the power knob harder than necessary. The sound cut, but the rhythm lingered in my head, phantom tapping against the inside of my skull. I drove with both hands locked on the wheel, eyes flicking between the road and the canyon walls, half expecting movement where there shouldn't be any. The road narrowed further. The turnout I remembered wasn't there. Instead, the asphalt simply continued. No shoulder, no space to turn around. The canyon pressed in, the basalt walls close enough now that I could see individual seams, lighter lines where something had fractured long ago and never fully separated. I checked my mirrors constantly. At some point, I realized I'd stopped seeing the river. The hiss was still there, steady and low, but the water itself had vanished behind the curves and shadows. The sound didn't change with distance. It didn't get quieter or louder. It stayed exactly the same, as if it wasn't tied to location anymore. A mile marker loomed ahead. I slowed to read it. The number had been scratched out. Below it, someone had written in black marker, "Still with you." My mouth went dry. I told myself it was graffiti, teenagers, hunters, anyone with time and a marker. But the handwriting bothered me, not messy, not rushed, careful, almost formal, like a note meant to be understood. The RV shuddered suddenly, a brief lateral sway that made my stomach drop. I corrected instinctively, heart hammering, then realized the road itself was slanted now, warped subtly toward the canyon wall. Not enough to be obvious at first glance, enough to keep me drifting right if I didn't fight it. The air inside the cab felt colder. I turned the heater on. Nothing happened. The fan clicked uselessly, then gave up. My breath fogged faintly, even though the sun had climbed higher. And then I heard my name. It came from the left, from the rock face. Not shouted, not whispered, spoken the way you say someone's name when you're checking if they're listening. I didn't answer. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles ached. The voice didn't repeat itself. Instead, it slid back into the static hiss of the canyon, dissolving like it had never been there. A memory surfaced without warning. A forum thread I'd read years ago, late at night, while planning a different trip. Someone had posted about road closures in remote areas, places where exits stayed temporarily closed for years. They'd mentioned Hell's Canyon in passing, not by name, by description. If the road starts correcting itself, leave, the post had said. I tried to pull it up on my phone. No signal, no cached pages. When I searched later, the thread didn't exist. The road bent sharply, and I found myself slowing instinctively. Ahead, parked crooked across a narrow shoulder, was another vehicle. A pickup, older, dust-caked, Idaho plates. Relief hit me so fast it made me dizzy. I pulled alongside, rolled my window down, and called out. A man stood near the driver's side, leaning against the bed. Late 50s, maybe, gray beard, ranger hat, sun-bleached and misshapen. He looked at me like he'd been expecting someone, just not sure who. "You heading out?" he asked. His voice sounded tired, not strained, worn thin. "Trying to," I said. "The exit's blocked." "Is there another way?" He nodded slowly, eyes flicking past me toward the canyon behind my RV. "Road'll take you where you need to go," he said, "just not always where you think." I laughed nervously. "That's not reassuring." He didn't smile. "You hear it yet?" he asked. "Hear what?" He tapped the side of his head, then the truck's door. The metal rang dully. "The rhythm." My stomach dropped. "I thought it was my radio," I said. "Most folks do." I noticed then that his truck radio antenna was bent flat against the roof, snapped clean off. "Exit's been closed indefinitely a long time," he went on. "Paper says one thing, memory says another." "Memory of what?" He studied me for a long moment, then said, "Of leaving." The wind gusted hard, whipping dust between us. For a second, the air filled so loud it felt physical, like pressure against my ears. When it passed, the man was walking back to his truck. "Wait," I said. "Is there a ranger station nearby? Somewhere official?" He paused with his hand on the door. "There was," he said, "once." Then he got in and drove, not toward the barricade, but deeper into the canyon, disappearing around a bend I didn't remember being there before. I sat there longer than I should have. Eventually, I followed. The road dipped sharply, then leveled out into a stretch that felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The canyon walls here were closer, darker. The smell of cold iron was stronger, layered now with ozone. My ears rang faintly, like I'd been standing near faulty wiring. That's when I saw it again. The symbol, carved into the rock face at eye level. Clean, precise. The circle and line, repeated 3 times in a row, evenly spaced. Below it, etched shallowly, was a phrase. "Stay in signal." The RV's lights flickered. The dashboard clock reset to 12. And through the windshield, reflected faintly in the glass, I saw movement, not ahead of me, but behind. A shape pacing my speed, just outside the reach of the mirrors. I accelerated. The road stretched, straightened unnaturally, the canyon blurring at the edges. The static rose again, filling the cab, threading through my thoughts. I could feel it trying to align me, tune me, like I was just another receiver. And somewhere beneath it all, the rhythm continued. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, as if something was knocking. From the inside, I didn't know when I stopped believing the road was real. There wasn't a single moment where it broke apart or revealed itself. No impossible geometry, no sudden drop into nightmare. Just a slow, accumulating sense that the canyon had stopped responding to my movement and started anticipating it instead. Every curve felt pre-decided. The speedometer needle wavered even though my foot stayed steady. 45, 50, 40 again. The engine note deepened and thinned without input, like someone else was feathering the throttle from underneath the floor. I tried the brakes. They worked, but not immediately. There was a soft delay, a half second, where the RV continued forward as if considering whether stopping aligned with whatever plan the road had in mind. When it finally slowed, the relief was short-lived. The static surged, angry now, buzzing through the speakers even though the radio was still off. Then the voices came back. Not clear. Never clear. They rode the wind, stitched together from fragments, half-words, breath, the suggestion of language. I caught syllables that felt almost familiar. My name again, maybe, or something shaped like it. I focused on the road, jaw clenched, repeating the sentence from the laminated notice in my head like a prayer. Do not respond. The canyon light dimmed. Not sunset, not clouds, just less, as if contrast had been dialed down. Shadows bled into rock, edges softened, depth perception flattened until the road felt painted onto the windshield rather than stretching away from me. And then, impossibly, I saw the picnic table again. Same turnout, same rusted fire ring, same symbol. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded slightly, tires screaming in a way that finally echoed, sharp and wrong. I sat there shaking, staring at the turnout I knew I had already passed. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't looped. The GPS screen was still dead, a black mirror reflecting my own pale face back at me. I got out anyway. The air here was colder than before, heavy with that iron and stone smell. The symbol on the table looked older now, edges weathered, like it had been there longer than yesterday, longer than me. Something was scratched beneath it this time, not carved. written lightly, like a reminder meant for the writer. "You're doing fine." I laughed. It came out brittle and too loud, cracking in the quiet. The sound seemed to travel outward, then fold back in on itself, returning thinner, distorted. I stopped abruptly, breath hitching, because for a moment I could have sworn the echo laughed too. The knock came again. 3 firm taps. This time it wasn't on the RV. It was on the picnic table. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get back inside, to put metal and glass between me and whatever was testing the acoustics of human behavior. The knocking didn't repeat. It didn't need to. The message felt complete. I drove. Harder now. Faster than I should have. The road accepted it without protest, stretching straight ahead, smooth as a runway. The canyon walls blurred into dark bands, the river's hiss rising in pitch until it sounded almost like static again, like the same sound wearing a different mask. The dashboard clock flickered. 12. 12. My phone vibrated once in the cup holder. I grabbed it reflexively, heart pounding. One notification. No signal bars. No app icon. Just text. Stay in signal. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat like it had burned me. The RV shuddered as the road dipped sharply, plunging us into a deeper cut of canyon where the light thinned to a gray wash. The temperature dropped fast enough that my breath fogged fully now, clouds forming and dissipating in front of my face. And then I saw the exit, the real one. I felt it before I believed it, the way you sense a door opening behind you without hearing it. The canyon widened ahead, walls pulling back reluctantly, the road sloping upward toward open sky. The barricade was gone. No sign, no warning, just asphalt leading out. Relief hit me so hard my vision blurred. I laughed again, this time with something like joy, and pressed the accelerator, willing the RV forward toward space and light and anything that wasn't listening to me think. The static spiked. The voices rose, overlapping now, urgent, insistent, tangled. I didn't try to understand them. I kept my eyes on the widening sky, the way blue bled back into the world, how the light sharpened and regained weight. As I crossed the threshold, tires bumping over a subtle seam in the road, the sound cut out entirely. Silence. Real silence. The RV lurched once like it had been released from tension, and then the engine settled into a normal, comforting hum. The heater kicked on. Warm air flooded the cab. Color returned fully, painfully bright. I didn't stop driving until I reached the first proper turnout miles later, a place with signage and tire tracks and the comforting clutter of humanity. I pulled over, shut the engine off, and sat there shaking until my hands steadied. When I checked the time, hours had passed. When I checked my phone, I had signal again. No notification, no message, no photo of the symbol. I left Hell's Canyon that day and didn't look back. Weeks later, at home, I tried to make sense of it. I searched road closure notices, ranger bulletins, archived PDFs. I found references to temporary access restrictions, vague and shifting, dates that didn't line up. One PDF mentioned a secondary ranger station decommissioned years ago due to structural concerns. No details, no names. I found a cached blog post once, a travel journal from a guy who'd camped near the Snake River years before. He'd written about hearing knocking sounds, about a radio that wouldn't stay off, about a symbol carved into a table. When I clicked through, the page refreshed. Gone. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the air conditioner hums just right, I hear it again. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Not on the door, not on the walls. Inside the sound itself, like a rhythm riding beneath the noise of the world. I don't answer. I've learned better than that. But every so often when I'm driving and the road stretches empty ahead of me, I catch a faint smell of cold iron and ozone through the vents. And for just a moment, my mirrors feel crowded, as if something is still pacing me, as if I never really left the signal. The desert echoes, just not always in the direction you expect. I woke up to the sound of an engine breathing, not roaring, not starting, just breathing. A low, uneven rhythm that didn't belong to sleep, didn't belong to dawn, and sure as hell didn't belong to a van that had been shut down for hours. The sound slid into my dreams and pulled me out by the spine, like a hand reaching through my chest and squeezing. For a few seconds, I lay completely still on the narrow bed in the back of my Volkswagen, staring at the dark ceiling, listening. The van rocked gently, as it always did when I shifted my weight, the old suspension sighing like tired lungs. But underneath that familiar creak was the other sound, the one that shouldn't have been there, a faint, staggered idle. I held my breath, hoping the sound would stop if I didn't acknowledge it. It didn't. It wavered, dipped, then steadied again, as if whatever was making it was learning how to keep going. The smell reached me next. Warm oil, old gasoline, metal that had been worked too hard and never forgiven. I sat up too fast and smacked my head on the cabinet above the bed. The pain flashed white behind my eyes, sharp and grounding. Good. Pain meant I was awake. Pain meant this wasn't one of those half-dream hallucinations you get alone in the woods when silence presses too close and your brain starts inventing company. My name is Aaron. I was 36 when this happened. I grew up in Oregon, the kind of childhood where forests aren't destinations, they're backyards. I'd been camping my whole life. Not glamping, not weekend getaways. Real camping, rain-soaked, quiet, uncomfortable. I trusted the woods, I trusted my instincts, and I trusted my van more than anything else I owned. That van was an '89 Volkswagen Vanagon, dull blue, sun-faded, held together by years of stubborn maintenance and refusal to quit. I rebuilt most of it myself. Engine, wiring, fuel lines. I knew every sound it made, every tick as it cooled, every rattle that meant something was loose but not dangerous. When I shut it off that night, I waited until the engine heat bled out completely. I always did. That van slept when I told it to. Now it was breathing without me. I slid my legs over the edge of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold metal floor. The chill climbed straight up my bones. Outside, the forest was still black, the hour before dawn when everything feels unfinished. The curtains over the windows were drawn tight, but the sound slipped through them easily. I reached forward and grabbed the keys hanging on the hook near the driver's seat. They were there, cold, heavy, real. I stared at them longer than I should have, my thumb rubbing the worn Volkswagen logo like it might answer me. If the keys were here, then nothing should be running. Simple logic. Mechanical truth. The engine coughed, just once, like a throat clearing. I moved into the driver's seat slowly, my body tense, movements deliberate. The steering wheel felt solid under my hands. Familiar. The dashboard was dark, no lights, no indicators. The tachometer needle trembled just above zero, twitching like it was nervous. I turned the key backward, passed off, forcing it to stop. Silence slammed into the van. It wasn't relief. It was worse. The sudden absence felt loud, like standing in a room where someone just stopped screaming. My ears rang. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, fast and shallow. I waited. Nothing happened. I laughed, a short sound that died halfway out of my mouth. It echoed wrong inside the van, bouncing off the cabinets and coming back thinner, unfamiliar. Electrical issue? I muttered to no one. Saying it out loud made it sound smaller, manageable. Cold morning. Wiring. The forest didn't respond. I pulled on my jacket and boots and opened the sliding door. Cold air poured in, sharp and biting, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine sap. The ground outside was dusted with frost, thin white crystals clinging to the gravel and fallen needles. The campsite sat deep in the Willamette National Forest, miles from the nearest maintained campground. No name, just a clearing someone had carved out years ago and left behind. I like places like this. No generators, no lanterns glowing in the distance, just trees and space and the quiet you earn by going far enough. I stepped out and walked around to the back of the van, my breath fogging in front of me. The forest stood tall and still, trunks rising like pillars, branches woven together so tightly overhead that the sky only leaked through in pale fragments. No wind, no birds, no movement. I popped the rear hatch and leaned in, placing my hand on the engine block. Cold, not warm, not even lukewarm. Cold the way it should be after a long night. No leaks, no smoke, no signs of life at all. My stomach tightened. That's when I heard the knock. 3 taps. Soft but deliberate. Evenly spaced. Close. It came from the driver's side door. I froze, my hand still resting on the engine, my back exposed to the clearing behind me. The sound crawled up my spine and settled there, heavy and unpleasant. It wasn't random. It wasn't an animal brushing past. It was a knock. I straightened slowly and turned my head just enough to look toward the front of the van. Nothing. No silhouette, no shadow. Just the door, exactly where I'd left it, pale blue paint catching the first thin light of morning. Another knock, this one louder, expectant. I swallowed and forced my voice to stay level. Hello? The word felt too big for the clearing. It hung there for a second, then fell apart into the trees. No answer. I walked around the van, each step careful, my eyes scanning the frost-covered ground. There were no footprints. None. Just my own, looping back from earlier, half hidden under the thin white layer. I stood there longer than I should have, listening, waiting for the forest to explain itself. It didn't. I locked the door when I got back inside, even though I knew it already was. I made coffee, hands shaking just enough to spill a few drops onto the counter. The smell helped, dark and bitter, familiar, ritual as armor. When the engine started cleanly an hour later, I almost believed it was over. I pulled out of the clearing just after sunrise, gravel crunching loudly beneath the tires. The road was narrow, barely more than a scar through the trees, winding and uneven. I kept the radio off, windows cracked, listening to everything. That's when the smell returned. Not fuel this time. Something heavier. Wet. Old. Like earth that had been disturbed after a long time undisturbed. It crept in through the vents and wrapped around the inside of the van. Subtle but persistent. I checked the gauges. Everything normal. The road bent sharply, narrowing further, and a prickle of unease crawled up my neck. I didn't recognize this stretch. I knew these forests. I studied the maps before I came. I was sure of the route. But the trees here leaned closer, the light dimmer, the air colder. My GPS flickered, then went black, the screen dying without warning. The engine stuttered, once, twice. I pulled over without thinking, the van rolling to a stop beneath a canopy, so thick it felt like dusk again. The ticking of cooling metal filled the silence, each tick sharp and distinct. That ticking used to comfort me. Now it sounded like counting. I stepped out, heart pounding, and followed the smell off the road, drawn by something I didn't want to name. The ground dipped sharply into a shallow ravine choked with ferns and fallen logs, and there it was. Another Volkswagen. Older, rusted through. Windows gone, paint eaten away by years of neglect. It sat nose down in the ravine like it had driven there on purpose and never climbed out. The steering wheel was still there. So was the badge, hanging by a thread of rust, swaying, even though there was no wind. Behind me, my engine coughed. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The sound carried just far enough to remind me I wasn't alone with my thoughts anymore. I straightened slowly, every muscle tight, eyes still locked on the ravine, and the dead Volkswagen resting inside it like a grave marker someone forgot to label. I hadn't touched my van. I hadn't even looked at it since stepping off the road. The smell thickened, damp and metallic, as if the earth itself was breathing out through a wound. I took a step backward, then another, my boots slipping slightly on wet leaves. The ravine felt deeper now, the angle steeper, like it was inviting me to misjudge my footing. I turned around. My van sat exactly where I'd left it, crooked at the shoulder of the road, nose angled slightly downhill. The sliding door was closed, the curtains were drawn, and from beneath it, a thin ribbon of white vapor curled into the cold air. Exhaust. The engine idled unevenly, that same staggered rhythm I'd heard before dawn, not fully awake, not asleep, like it was being kept alive with just enough effort to matter. My mouth went dry. I walked back toward it slowly, eyes flicking between the tree line and the road, waiting for something to step out to explain this in a way that made sense. Nothing did. The forest stayed still, heavy, attentive. I reached the driver's door and pulled it open. The keys were in the ignition. Again. I stared at them, my mind scrambling for a version of events where this was my fault. Sleepwalking, muscle memory, some automatic habit I'd forgotten about. But I knew myself better than that. I was careful, especially out here, especially alone. I yanked the keys out and the engine died instantly, silence snapping tight around me. I stood there longer than I should have, breathing hard, trying to slow my heart. Panic hovered just behind my ribs, testing the door. I pushed it back with routine, checklists, practicality. Get out, I told myself, just get out. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. Nothing. No crank, no click. Dead silence. I tried again, nothing. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The forest seemed closer now, trees pressing in on either side of the narrow road. The light had dimmed, clouds rolling in without warning, flattening the world into shades of gray and green. I popped the hood and stepped out again, moving faster now, urgency bleeding into my movements. The smell was stronger near the front, thick enough to taste. I leaned over the engine bay, checking connections, fuel lines, anything obvious. Everything looked fine, too fine. I slammed the hood shut harder than I needed to, the sound echoing off the trees. It came back at me wrong, stretched thin, like the forest was repeating it poorly on purpose. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not close, not rushing, slow, measured, coming from somewhere just off the road, deeper in the trees. I froze, every sense snapping sharp. The footsteps stopped when I did, as if whatever was making them had noticed. Hey! I called out, my voice louder than before, edged with something brittle. If you need help, say something. Silence. Then, faintly, a sound that almost wasn't a sound at all. A low murmur, not words, just the shape of speech, filtered through distance and foliage like someone talking into the earth. I backed toward the van, one step at a time, never taking my eyes off the trees. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. The murmur stopped. Something knocked on the side of the van. Not hard. Just enough to let me know it could. I spun and yanked the driver's door open, throwing myself inside and slamming it shut. I locked it out of instinct, the click sounding thin and useless in the sudden quiet. My breath came fast and shallow. The van felt smaller now, metal walls closing in, every sound amplified. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and squeezed my eyes shut for a second. When I opened them, the dashboard lights flickered. The engine turned over. I hadn't touched the key. It started smoothly this time, surging to life like nothing had ever been wrong. Relief hit me so hard it almost hurt, a rush of adrenaline that made my hands shake. I didn't wait to question it. I threw the van into gear and pulled back onto the road, tires spitting gravel as I accelerated. The trees blurred past, branches clawing at the sides of the van, shadows flickering like something trying to keep pace. The smell followed me. It filled the cabin, heavy and choking, seeping into the upholstery, the curtains, my clothes. I rolled the windows down despite the cold, gasping for clean air. The engine whined, a high, thin sound threading through the rumble, rising and falling in a way that made my teeth ache. The road twisted sharply, turning back on itself, looping in ways that didn't feel right. I watched the trees, certain I was passing the same shapes again and again. A split trunk, a lightning-scarred pine, a fallen log that looked like an animal curled up to sleep. My GPS stayed black. The radio hissed to life without being turned on, a wash of static that swelled and dipped like breathing. I reached for the knob and twisted it hard. The static stopped. The engine revved, too high. I eased off the gas, but the revs stayed up, the van surging forward like it was pulling against me. Panic shoved its way in fully now, hot and insistent. No, I said out loud. No, no, no. I pressed the brake. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the van slowed, grudgingly, like it was considering whether to listen. My chest burned. My hands shook so badly I had to clamp them around the wheel. The road dipped and straightened suddenly, trees thinning ahead. Light spilled through, pale and wide, like a door opening. I burst out of the forest onto a paved highway so abruptly it felt like being spit out. The tires hummed against asphalt. The engine settled. The smell vanished as if it had never been there. Cars passed in the opposite lane. Real cars, real people. I laughed, a raw, broken sound, and didn't stop until my throat hurt. I drove another 20 miles before pulling into a gas station, the first one I saw, and parked crooked near the pumps. I turned the engine off and sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart still racing. The van was quiet, normal, too normal. I stepped out and filled the tank, the ordinary routine grounding me piece by piece. The attendant didn't look at me twice. No one did. The world carried on without a ripple. I checked under the hood again. Nothing wrong. No leaks, no heat, no answers. I didn't camp that night. I drove until the forest thinned into foothills, then into open land, until the sky felt big enough again. When I finally pulled over at a rest stop, surrounded by other vehicles and light, I slept with the curtains open, watching the world, waiting for the sound of breathing that never came. I sold that van a year later. Not because it broke, not because it failed me, because some things work too well after they've shown you what else they can do. I still camp, I still go alone, but I listen differently now. I don't dismiss the first hint of unease. I don't rationalize the things that arrive quietly, because in the deep woods, engines don't start themselves. When they do, and when they do, it means something has already noticed you. For a long time after that trip, I told myself the story ended at the gas station. That once I hit pavement, once I saw other people and fluorescent lights and heard a cashier ask if I wanted a receipt, whatever had happened back there lost its grip on me. That it belonged to the forest now. That it stayed where it was. That lie worked for a while. It worked through the summer, through a few short trips closer to town, through the familiar rituals of packing and unpacking and convincing myself I was still the same person I'd been before. The van ran perfectly. Too perfectly. No stutters, no electrical issues, no phantom smells. Mechanics found nothing. Friends told me I'd gotten spooked and my brain had done the rest. I nodded along. I smiled. I agreed. But at night, when everything was quiet enough to hear my own breathing, I noticed something else. The silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied. The first time I noticed it, I was camped near the coast, parked above a bluff where the ocean below breathed slow and heavy. Wind rattled the grass outside, salt in the air, everything familiar and open. I lay in the back of the van, staring up at the ceiling, listening. The engine was off. Cold. I'd checked twice. Still, I waited. I told myself it was paranoia, residual fear. Trauma likes to echo, especially when you give it quiet to work with. I reminded myself of every logical explanation I'd rehearsed. Electrical gremlins, coincidence, stress. Then, faintly, I felt it. Not a sound, a vibration. So subtle it might have been imagined if I hadn't known exactly what it felt like. A low, uneven pulse traveling up through the frame of the van, into the bed, into my ribs. Not enough to register as movement, just enough to register as presence. I held my breath. The vibrations stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next few months, I started noticing patterns. Little things I couldn't prove but couldn't ignore either. The keys turning up in places I didn't remember putting them. The faint smell of damp earth on my clothes after nights when I never left the van. The way the engine sometimes ticked long after it should have gone quiet, each sound spaced too evenly to be random. I stopped camping deep. I stayed near maintained sites, near people, near roads. It helped, until it didn't. The night that finally broke whatever illusion I had left was unremarkable by any normal standard. I was parked in a crowded campground in Northern California, families nearby, kids riding bikes, generators humming in the distance. Light everywhere. Noise. Proof. I lay there with the curtains cracked, watching lanterns swing gently in the breeze, listening to laughter carry through the trees. Safe, by every definition I'd ever trusted. Just before dawn, I woke up. No noise this time. No smell. Just the certainty. That same cold awareness, blooming in my chest before my eyes even opened. Like someone standing just outside your field of vision, waiting for you to notice. I lay still, heart pounding, and listened. Nothing. I turned my head toward the driver's seat. The keys were in the ignition. I sat up slowly, every movement deliberate, and stared at them. I knew, with a clarity that didn't feel like panic, but like acceptance, that if I turned them, the engine would start. Cleanly. Easily. like it always did when it wanted to. I didn't touch them. I stayed there until the sky lightened and the campground stirred awake around me, until the spell broke under the weight of normal morning sounds. That day, I drove straight home. I listed the van for sale the following week. People asked why. They always do. I gave them reasonable answers: age, mileage, wanting something newer. They nodded, satisfied. They didn't need the truth. The truth wouldn't have helped them. The man who bought it was excited, younger than me, full of plans. He talked about road trips, about disappearing into the woods for weeks at a time. I watched him drive away, the blue paint catching the sun, the engine humming steady and obedient. I felt relief and something like guilt. It's been years now. I still camp, but differently. I choose places with edges, not depths. I pay attention to the first moment something feels off instead of arguing with it. I leave earlier. I don't try to outthink the unease, because the lesson wasn't that the woods are evil. The lesson was that solitude is not the same as control. Out there, away from witnesses and routines, you are seen more clearly than you realize. Not by something supernatural, not necessarily, but by the quiet systems of the world that don't care whether you understand them or not. Machines, forests, old places that remember patterns longer than they remember people. I don't believe my van was haunted. I believe it learned something about me. And I believe that once something learns the sound of your fear, it never quite forgets how to make itself heard. I didn't plan to stay at Observation Point overnight. That's the truth I keep coming back to when I try to understand why I ignored so many small warnings. I had been driving the old Volkswagen Westphalia since dawn, hugging the Columbia River as fog peeled back in strips, the cliffs rising like blunt teeth on my right. Observation Point wasn't on my printed itinerary. On the map, it was just a pull-out symbol and a dotted trail that climbed toward a viewpoint. No campground icon, no facilities, just a name. But the road sign was there. Brown, sun-faded, pointing up a narrow spur road that felt narrower than it should have been. I remember thinking I could park for an hour, eat something, let the engine cool. The van had been running hot since Hood River. The spur road curved through firs and basalt outcroppings, the river disappearing behind a wall of trees. The radio lost its signal halfway up. Not silence exactly, more like a thin, restless static that breathed in and out. I turned it off and rolled down the window. The air smelled wrong. Not bad, not rotten, just old, like cold dust and wet metal, a smell you get in places that have been closed for a long time but never locked. At the top, the road ended in a gravel loop that looked recently used. Tire marks. A fire ring blackened but intact. Someone had dragged a picnic table into the trees, half hidden, like it didn't want to be seen from above. Beyond that, a narrow trail disappeared toward the cliff. I parked the VW facing out of habit. Killed the engine. The ticking of cooling metal filled the space, louder than it should have been. When it stopped, the quiet pressed in so fast it made my ears ring. That was the first moment I felt watched. Not in a dramatic way, just a subtle awareness, like when you realize someone has been standing behind you in line for a while and you never noticed when they arrived. I told myself it was the elevation, the isolation. I grabbed a sandwich and stepped outside. The gorge stretched out beyond the trees, wide and pale under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to clear. Wind moved along the cliff face in steady breaths. Each gust carried the same faint sound, over and over, like a radio scanning channels. Static, then almost words, then static again. I walked the edge but stayed back from the drop. The ground felt firm, familiar. The kind of place people stopped all the time. Lovers, hikers, kids posing for photos. The picnic table had initials carved into it, some recent, some so old they'd smoothed into grain. One marking caught my eye, a small triangle with a line through it, carved shallow but deliberate. I'd seen it before, somewhere. Or thought I had. When I went back to the van, the inside felt colder than it should have. The day had warmed. Sunlight filtered through the windshield. Still, I rubbed my arms and shut the sliding door behind me. I ate, checked my phone, no signal. I scrolled anyway, muscle memory more than intent. A cached page loaded, an old blog I'd bookmarked months ago after a late-night spiral of camping forums and ranger anecdotes. The header image was broken, replaced by a blank square. The title read, Observation Points and the Illusion of Safety. I tapped it. The text blurred, then vanished. Page not found. I knew that blog. Or at least I knew I'd read something like it. A first-person account. A man who talked about staying too long at places meant only to be passed through. I remembered a line, not clearly, but the shape of it. If you feel like you're being counted, leave before the number finishes. I laughed out loud in the van, the sound brittle. Get a grip, I said to no one. I planned to leave after another 10 minutes. I even started the engine. It turned over once, then died. Tried again. Nothing but a hollow click. I sat there longer than I should have, hands on the wheel, listening to the wind. The static sound had crept back in, even with the radio off. It seemed closer now, like it was coming from inside the dashboard. I stepped out to check the engine bay. Everything looked fine to my untrained eye. No smoke. No leaks. When I straightened up, I realized the light had shifted. The sun was lower, the shadows longer, with the trees leaning in toward the clearing as if the ground beneath them had softened. That was when I heard the voice. Not words, a cadence, human in rhythm but stripped of meaning, carried on the wind. It rose and fell from the direction of the trail, then stopped abruptly, like someone had closed a door. I waited for my heart to slow. It didn't. Hello? I called, hating how small my voice sounded. Nothing answered, just the gorge breathing. I considered hiking down. But the trail looked steeper than I remembered from earlier, the switchbacks tighter, the drop-offs closer to the edge. On the printed map in my glove box, the trail was a simple line. Here, it twisted in on itself, doubling back in ways that didn't make sense. I folded the map, unfolded it again. Same thing. Paper said one thing. Ground said another. I locked the van and started down anyway, just far enough to see if I could spot another road or a ranger station sign. The air grew colder with each step, the smell of old metal stronger. Halfway down, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, matching my pace exactly. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned. The trail was empty. When I got back to the clearing, the picnic table had moved. Not far, just a few feet closer to the van. Close enough that I could smell the wood, sap, and something else, something like ozone. The triangle symbol stared up at me from the tabletop, newly darkened, as if someone had traced it again. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I lay on the thin mattress, listening to the wind speak in almost phrases, to the static that now pulsed through the walls in time with my breath. Every so often there was a soft knock from the outside of the van. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps again. Human rhythm. Patient. At some point near dawn, the smell changed. Cold dust gave way to something warmer, familiar. Coffee, burnt toast, morning kitchens. A memory that didn't belong on a cliffside. That was when I understood the real danger wasn't whatever was outside. It was how badly I wanted to open the door and see who was waiting. I reached for the door handle before I realized I was doing it. My fingers closed around the cold metal, and for a split second the knocking stopped, as if whatever was out there felt the contact through the skin of the van. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Thick, expectant. I pulled my hand back and pressed it flat against my chest until my breathing slowed enough not to fog the windshield. "You're tired," I whispered. "That's all." The smell of coffee lingered, warm and intimate, like someone had just stepped out to let it cool. It didn't belong to any memory I could place cleanly, but it tugged at something emotional rather than visual. Sunday mornings, low voices, safety. I hated how comforting it felt. The static rose again, threading through the walls, through the cupboards, whispering along the seams of the van. When I shifted my weight, the sound shifted too, like it was tracking me. I waited for daylight to fully arrive. When it did, it was thin and gray, like light filtered through dirty glass. The gorge beyond the trees looked flatter than it had the day before, the river a pale ribbon instead of a vast body. Depth felt wrong. Distances lied. I sat up and checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time read 6:12 a.m., but the battery had drained almost completely overnight. I was certain I'd charged it before parking. Outside, the picnic table hadn't moved any closer, but something new sat on it. A folded piece of paper, weighted by a stone. I watched it through the windshield for a long time, arguing with myself. Eventually, the need to confirm reality, to prove that I was still the one making choices, pushed me out the door. The air was colder than it should have been for morning. My breath showed. When I stepped toward the table, the static grew louder, rising into a high, almost pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The paper was a map, not my map, not any park-issued pamphlet. It was hand-drawn in black ink, the lines pressed hard enough to score the paper beneath. The road up to Observation Point was there, the loop, the trail. But there were additions, hash marks along the clearing, like tally lines. Small triangles scattered at intervals, each one marked with a line through it. And near the edge of the paper, written so faintly I almost missed it, "Stay within view." I folded the map and turned in a slow circle. Nothing had changed. Trees, van, cliff, the same space I'd already memorized. And yet the instruction made my stomach tighten because I realized I didn't actually know what within view meant here. View of what? I didn't hear the footsteps this time. I felt them, vibrations through the gravel, subtle but rhythmic, moving behind me. I didn't turn around. I walked back to the van with deliberate calm and shut the door, locking it even though I knew how useless that was. I tried the engine again. It started immediately, roaring to life like it had never had a problem at all. Relief surged so fast it left me dizzy. I didn't wait. I backed out, tires crunching, heart hammering. As I drove down the spur road, the static followed me, not from the radio, still off, but from the trees themselves. The wind threaded through the branches, shaping sound into patterns that brushed the edge of language. Every curve in the road felt longer than before, every straightaway subtly uphill. Halfway down, I saw a man standing on the shoulder. He wore a ranger's uniform, green shirt, badge, but it was older than any I'd seen recently. The fabric hung stiff, the color faded toward gray. He didn't wave. He just watched me approach, expression unreadable. I slowed, rolled down the window. "Hey," I said. My voice shook despite my effort. "Is there a station nearby?" "My van." "You didn't stay the night, did you?" he asked. His voice was calm, flat, like he already knew the answer. I broke down," I said. "I'm leaving now." He nodded once, eyes flicking past me toward the road behind. "They don't like it when people linger." "They?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. He hesitated, just a fraction. "Some places keep records," he said, "even when we don't." I thought of the tally marks, the erased blog, the triangle carved into wood. "I heard voices," I said. "Static, knocking." That earned a longer look. Not surprised, not skeptical, tired. "If you hear your own memories talking back," he said, "don't answer." "What is this place?" I asked. He stepped back from the road. "Observation Point," he said, like it was explanation enough. Then quieter. "It's not meant to be reciprocal." I wanted to ask more, to cling to him as proof that this was still a shared reality. But he was already turning away, walking uphill against gravity that seemed to resist him less than it should have. When I looked back in the mirror, the road was empty. The rest of the drive down passed in a blur of clenched muscles and shallow breaths. As soon as I hit the main highway, my phone buzzed, signal flooding back in all at once. Notifications stacked up, missed messages, news alerts. One thing stood out, a video link from a number I didn't recognize, timestamped at 3:14 a.m. The thumbnail was black. I didn't tap it until I reached a rest stop miles away, surrounded by other cars, other people, the mundane noise of travel. The video opened to static, not digital compression or buffering, the same breathing static from the campsite, rising and falling in a familiar rhythm. After a few seconds, an image resolved. It was my van. Parked at Observation Point, the camera angle was elevated distant, like it was being filmed from the trees. The clearing was marked with faint white lines I hadn't seen before, geometric and precise. As the static softened, I heard knocking. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. The camera zoomed in slightly. The van door filled the frame. From the inside, I heard my own voice. Sleepy. Trusting. "Yeah?" it said. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. When I picked it up again, the video was gone. The message thread didn't exist. Battery at 90%, like nothing had happened. I drove until nightfall, then farther. I didn't stop at campsites. I didn't open the radio. Every time the wind hit the van just right, I flinched, waiting for the static to return. It did, weeks later, in quieter ways. In the hush between channels, in the low murmur of distant crowds, in the smell of coffee where none had been brewed. Sometimes I dream of the map, of tally marks being added one by one, of standing at the edge of something vast, feeling it look back. I don't camp anymore. But every so often, when I'm stopped at a lookout just long enough to rest my eyes, I feel that same awareness settle in, and I leave before it finishes counting. I told myself the worst part was over. That's what I said out loud in the weeks that followed. Whenever my hands started to shake on the steering wheel, or I caught myself scanning tree lines the way you look for exits in a crowded room. I sold the Volkswagen 2 months later to a college kid who wanted something retro. I didn't tell him where I'd taken it. I didn't tell him why I refused to sleep inside it ever again. I tried to go back to normal life. Normal didn't want me. It started with small distortions, harmless ones at first. I'd wake up convinced I'd heard wind moving through the apartment even on still nights. The hum of the refrigerator would slip in and out of that same breathing static, sinking itself to my pulse until I unplugged it just to prove I could control something. Coffee stopped smelling right. Sometimes it smelled burned, like memory. Other times it smelled like cold dust and metal, like the air at observation point just before sunset. I switched brands, switched mugs, stopped drinking it altogether. The smell still found me in places it didn't belong, on buses, in empty hallways, drifting from open car windows as traffic passed. I avoided the gorge, avoided cliffs, avoided anywhere the land opened wide enough to feel like it could look back. And then, one night, I found the map. It was tucked into a used book I bought at a thrift store 3 towns over, a travel memoir. Nothing remotely connected to camping. The map slipped out when I opened the cover and fluttered to the floor like it had been waiting for air. Same paper, same heavy black ink. Observation point was there. So was the spur road, the loop, the trail. But now there were more hash marks, enough that I didn't try to count them. At the bottom of the page, written darker than before, "Within view is within reach." I took the map back to the store the next day. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Marcy, looked at it longer than she should have. "We get those sometimes," she said finally. "Maps?" I asked. "Corrections," she replied, sliding it back toward me instead of taking it. "People trying to fix what doesn't stay fixed." "You've seen this place before?" I pressed. She hesitated, then shook her head once. "Not the place," she said. "The symbol. The triangle. The line through it. Some folks call it an observation mark," she went on, already turning away. "Means you've been included." "In what?" I asked. She didn't answer. That night, I dreamed of the picnic table. It sat alone in darkness, illuminated by a light with no source. Every carved initial whispered when I leaned close enough, overlapping voices layered so thick they blurred into static. When I looked down, my own name was there, newly carved, the wood still pale around the letters. I woke with the smell of ozone in my nose and the sense, strong, undeniable, that somewhere, something had updated a record. I started searching online again, despite promising myself I wouldn't. Old forums, archived posts, dead links. I found references to a video series that no longer existed, filmed by hikers documenting quiet places. Every description ended the same way, removed for inaccuracies. One username appeared again and again in comment threads that abruptly stopped mid-sentence, "Stay within view." I clicked the profile, empty. No posts, no history. Joined date unreadable. That was the night the knocking came back. Not on my door, on the inside of the wall. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again, perfectly measured, patient. I stood frozen in the hallway, back pressed to drywall that felt colder than it should have. The knocking moved slowly, deliberately, like fingers tracing the interior of the apartment, learning its shape. I didn't answer. I remembered the ranger's words. If you hear your own memories talking back, don't answer. The knocking stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard wind. Not outside, inside my head, moving through imagined trees, carrying voices stripped of language. I slid down to the floor and stayed there until morning light crept under the blinds and reminded me what direction time was supposed to move. I understood then that escape hadn't been an ending. It had been a postponement. Observation Point wasn't unique because of where it was. It was just honest about what it did, honest about watching, about recording, about letting people believe the attention was passive, harmless, one-sided. Some places don't need to chase you. They just need you to notice them. I still drive. I still travel for work. I still stop at rest areas and overlooks when fatigue outweighs fear. But I don't linger. I don't unpack. I don't let my thoughts settle long enough to feel comfortable. Whenever I step out of the car, I take a moment to look around, not for danger, but for symmetry, for lines that don't belong, for the sense that the space is holding its breath with me. If I feel it counting, I leave. Last week, I passed a brown road sign on a stretch of highway I'd driven dozens of times before. I don't remember it being there. Observation point. 2 miles. The arrow pointed toward a road that wasn't on my GPS. The wind picked up as I passed, brushing the car with a familiar sound, static threading itself into almost words. I kept my eyes forward, my hands steady. I didn't slow down. In the rearview mirror, for just a moment, I thought I saw a picnic table at the edge of the trees. I didn't look twice. Some lessons aren't meant to echo back, and some places are still watching, waiting for you to believe the silence means you're alone. The first thing that felt wrong wasn't a sound, it was the absence of one. I noticed it just after dusk, when the desert outside Joshua Tree usually exhales its last warmth and the wind starts combing through the scrub like fingers through dry hair. That night, there was nothing. No insects, no distant engines, no wind. Just my own breathing inside the cab of my old Volkswagen camper, loud enough that I caught myself holding it as if silence itself might hear me. My name is Marcus Hale. I was 38 when this happened. Born and raised in Arizona, the kind of guy who learned early how to read heat shimmer on asphalt and tell whether a noise in the dark was a coyote or just your nerves. I'd been living out of my VW on and off for years, short trips between longer stints back home, using camping as a way to quiet things I never really talked about. The road helped me pretend I wasn't carrying anything heavy. That trip, I told myself it was just another solo weekend. Parked a few miles off the main road, not in a campground exactly, but a legal dispersed spot I'd used before. No hookups, no neighbors, just me, the van, and a sky so wide it made your chest feel hollow. I backed the VW into position before sunset, nose angled toward the dirt road in case I needed a quick exit. Old habit. I leveled the wheels with rocks, popped the roof, and set up the inside like I always did. Same routine, same order. Predictability was comforting. It made me feel in control. I cooked a simple dinner, watched the light drain out of the rocks, and felt that familiar transition as the desert went from golden to gray to black. The temperature dropped fast. I pulled on a hoodie and slid into the driver's seat to check the dash cam. That camera was my one indulgence. Hardwired, wide-angle, front-facing. I installed it after a close call in Utah years back, someone stepping into the road at night, then vanishing before I could even brake properly. I told myself the camera was for insurance. Truth was, it made me feel less alone, like something else was watching when I couldn't. I powered it on, checked the red light. Recording. Same as always. The silence pressed closer as night settled in. I cracked the window just enough to let in air. The smell was sharp. Dust and creosote, that mineral dryness that sits at the back of your throat. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then stopped. I lay back on the bench seat and told myself to relax. This was what I came out here for, to sit with discomfort and let it pass. That's when I heard the first noise. Not outside, inside. A soft click. It came from behind me, near the rear door. Not loud, not sudden, just deliberate, like plastic shifting under a careful hand. I froze, listening. The van was old. It creaked and popped with temperature changes. I knew that. I'd slept through worse. But this sound had intention to it, a beginning and an end. I sat up slowly, heart already accelerating, and waited. Nothing. I told myself it was cooling metal, or maybe something brushing against the bumper outside. I grabbed my flashlight, swept the interior, cabinets closed, door locked, everything where it should be. Still, I didn't lie back down. Minutes stretched. My mind started doing what it always did when I was tired, connecting dots that didn't need connecting. I thought about that Utah road, about the way the figure had looked almost curious, about how I'd never quite shaken the feeling that someone had watched me drive away. I shook my head, annoyed at myself, and forced my body to relax. Fear feeds on attention. I knew that. I'd learned it the hard way. I was just drifting towards sleep when the dash cam chirped. A soft electronic beep, the kind it makes when it detects motion. My eyes snapped open. The camera shouldn't have been picking anything up. The road in front of me was empty. No headlights. No animals. I leaned forward, staring through the windshield into darkness. The red recording light was steady. Another beep. My stomach tightened. I reached over and tapped the screen to bring up the live feed. At first, it showed exactly what I expected. The dirt road, pale under the stars, scrub lining either side. Then something shifted at the edge of the frame. A shadow. It wasn't moving across the road. It was moving toward the van. Slowly. I held the screen closer, breath shallow. The shadow resolved into a shape, tall and narrow, just at the limit of the camera's night vision. No flashlight, no reflective gear, just a darker absence against the dark. "Okay," I whispered, though there was no one to hear it. I hit the lock button again, even though I knew the doors were already secured. The shadow stopped right in front of the bumper. The dash cam beeped again. The figure leaned forward. I couldn't see a face, just the suggestion of a head where a head should be. It stayed there, unmoving, as if it were studying the van, studying me. My skin prickled with the sudden certainty that this thing, this person, knew exactly where I was inside. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. After a few seconds, the figure straightened and stepped out of frame, disappearing to the right. The motion alert stopped. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I sat there for a long time, listening, muscles locked, trying to decide whether what I'd just seen was real enough to justify panic. People wander out here, lost hikers, locals cutting through land they know better than maps. There were explanations. That's what I told myself. I finally lay back down, though sleep didn't come easily. Every small sound felt amplified. Every shift of fabric made my pulse spike. At some point, I don't know how long after, I drifted off. I woke to the sound of my own voice, not speaking, breathing, fast, shallow. I sat up, disoriented, heart pounding, the van still wrapped in darkness. My hands were clenched into fists I didn't remember making. The dash cam screen was on. I don't remember turning it on. The playback timer was running. I leaned forward, dread pooling low and cold in my gut, and watched footage I had no memory of recording. On the screen, the van was still, the road empty. Then, from the side of the frame, from my blind spot, a shape emerged. Closer this time. It moved with a familiarity that made my chest tighten. Not cautious, not curious. Confident. The figure stepped directly in front of the van, close enough that the night vision washed it out in pale gray. I could make out shoulders, arms, hands. One of those hands reached up and knocked once on the hood. From inside the van, I heard myself inhale sharply in my sleep. On the screen, the figure tilted its head as if listening. Then it stepped to the side, toward the driver's door. That was where the footage ended. I sat there shaking, the van suddenly too small, too exposed, every shadow inside it feeling like a place something could hide. My rational mind scrambled for control, but something deeper had already accepted a harder truth. Whatever had come to my campsite that night hadn't just passed through, it had stayed, and I had slept through it. I stayed frozen in the driver's seat long after the screen went dark again, the silence now broken only by the low hum of my own blood rushing in my ears. My first instinct was to start the engine and leave. Just turn the key and put distance between me and whatever had decided my van was worth investigating. But fear has a way of tangling with pride, and pride whispered that running without understanding was how you stayed weak. So instead, I did something worse. I opened the door. The hinges creaked louder than they ever had before, the sound echoing off the rocks like a mistake I couldn't take back. Cold air spilled into the van, carrying that dry, metallic desert smell, but underneath it was something else now. Faint, sour, almost like damp fabric left too long in a closed space. It didn't belong out here. I stepped down slowly, boots crunching on gravel, flashlight in one hand, keys clenched in the other like they could double as a weapon. The hood of the van looked untouched. No dents, no fingerprints. But when I ran the beam along the driver's door, my stomach turned. There were smudges on the paint, long, uneven streaks, as if someone had dragged their fingertips along the metal, testing it. Not scratches, not dirt. More like residue, oily, faintly reflective when the light hit it just right. I wiped one with my thumb and immediately regretted it. The smell intensified, sharp and wrong, clinging to my skin. I rubbed my hand against my jeans, heart hammering, suddenly aware of how exposed I was standing there in the dark. I scanned the surrounding desert. The road was empty in both directions, no footprints that I could see, though the ground was hard-packed and unforgiving, the kind that didn't give up evidence easily. The rocks watched back in silence, ancient and indifferent. I told myself this was the moment to leave. Instead, I went back inside and checked the locks again. The rest of the night passed in fragments. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the cabinets, knees drawn up, flashlight resting across my lap, eyes flicking between the windshield and the dark corners of the van. Every time the dash cam chirped, my body jolted, adrenaline flooding in waves that left me shaky and exhausted. But nothing else appeared on the screen. Just before dawn, the desert finally stirred. Wind crept back in, whispering through scrub. A bird called somewhere far off. The world resumed its rhythm as if nothing had happened, and that normalcy felt like an accusation. When the sky began to lighten, I packed up fast, sloppy, unfocused. I didn't bother with breakfast, didn't clean. I just collapsed the roof, turned the key, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Only then did I let myself breathe. I told myself it was over. A close call. A stranger with bad boundaries, nothing more. But the road stretched ahead of me, and with every mile, a new thought crept in. Quiet, persistent, impossible to shake. The dash cam hadn't just caught someone outside. It had caught something responding to me. That thought followed me all the way back to Phoenix. It followed me into my driveway, into my house, into sleep that came hard and left me sweating. I kept seeing the figure's head tilt on the screen the way it seemed to listen, like it was learning. 2 days later, I pulled the dash cam's memory card. I told myself I was just going to save the clip, maybe hand it over if I decided to file a report. But once I started scrolling, I couldn't stop. Motion alerts dotted the timeline, far more than I remembered seeing. Most of them were nothing. Wind-blown brush, a rabbit darting across the road. But scattered between those were moments that made my chest tighten. Shadows passing too close to the van, always from the side, always lingering just outside the frame. And then there were the sounds. I hadn't noticed them in the van, but with headphones on, they were unmistakable. Soft taps, a faint scrape. Once, very clearly, a slow exhale close to the microphone. The timestamps chilled me most. These weren't all from the same night. There were clips from earlier trips, different locations, different months. The same pattern, the same kind of movement, the same pause near the driver's door. I leaned back in my chair, pulse racing, memories reassembling themselves with brutal clarity. Nights when I'd woken feeling watched. Campsites that suddenly felt wrong for no obvious reason. Times I dismissed my instincts because nothing concrete had happened, nothing I'd noticed. A hard truth settled in my chest then, heavy and undeniable. This hadn't been a one-time encounter. It had been following my silence. I didn't camp for a long time after that. Sold a lot of my gear. Let the van sit. Friends asked why I'd stopped going out. Joked that I'd finally grown tired of the road. I laughed it off, but inside something had shifted. The places that once brought me peace now felt like they were waiting. Months passed before I worked up the nerve to do anything with the footage. When I finally showed it to someone, a retired park ranger I knew through a mutual friend, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He watched in silence, jaw tight, eyes sharp. When the clip ended, he took a long breath and said something I still hear in my head late at night. "Whatever that is," he told me, "it's not lost, and it's not curious." He paused, then added, "It's checking boundaries." That was the lesson I didn't know I needed until then. Out there, in the quiet places, fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it waits for you to ignore it long enough that it doesn't have to knock anymore. I drive differently now. Park differently. I don't dismiss that tight feeling in my chest when a place feels off. I trust the part of myself that survived because it paid attention. And the dash cam? It's still there, recording. Because some truths don't reveal themselves in the moment you're strong enough to face them. But when you finally are, you need proof that what you felt was real. After that conversation, I thought the fear would fade. I thought naming it, understanding it, would shrink it down to something manageable. That's what we tell ourselves about monsters, that once you see them clearly, they lose their power. But this wasn't a monster in that sense. It didn't rage or chase or announce itself. It didn't need to. What unsettled me wasn't what it did, it was how little effort it took. How patient it was. How it seemed to exist comfortably in the margins of my awareness, thriving on the parts of my life where I wasn't paying attention. I started revisiting old memories with new honesty. Times I'd brushed off a noise as wildlife without checking. Moments I'd felt watched and told myself I was being dramatic. The night in Nevada when my dashcam battery drained for no reason at all. The morning in New Mexico when I found dust smeared across the windshield in shapes that didn't match the wind. I had survived those moments not because I was brave, but because whatever was out there hadn't decided to cross a certain line. Yet, that realization forced me to confront something uncomfortable about myself. I'd always prided myself on being rational, grounded, unshakable. I liked believing I could outthink fear, that preparation and experience made me immune to it. But what that night and the footage taught me was that denial can look a lot like confidence if you squint hard enough. Fear isn't the enemy out there. Ignoring it is. I eventually took the van out again, but not the way I used to. I don't camp as far off-grid anymore. I park where lines of sight are clear. I walk the perimeter before dark. I listen, not just to sounds, but to my own reactions to them. If a place feels wrong, I leave. No explanations, no bargaining, and I don't sleep with the dash cam screen off anymore. Some nights, when the road is long and the stars feel too distant, I catch myself glancing at the feed more than I should, watching shadows, measuring distance, waiting for movement that never comes. Most trips are quiet, uneventful, safe. But every now and then, when I'm parked somewhere remote enough that the world seems to thin out, the camera will chirp. Just once, no figure appears, no sound follows. The alert triggers, then stops, as if something passed close enough to be noticed, but not seen. In those moments, I don't freeze anymore. I don't panic. I acknowledge it. I sit there breathing slow, grounded in the present, reminding myself that awareness is not weakness, that listening is not surrender, that survival often depends on respecting the signals we're taught to suppress. RV camping teaches you a lot about freedom, the beauty of open roads, the peace of isolation, the pride of self-reliance, but it also teaches you something quieter and far more important. You are not alone out there, not in the comforting way, in the honest way. The wilderness doesn't care who you are or how prepared you think you might be. It doesn't reward bravado, it doesn't punish fear. It simply responds to attention, or the lack of it. That dash cam didn't save me by scaring me. It saved me by showing me the truth I'd been avoiding, that the most dangerous intruders don't kick down doors or break windows. They wait, they listen, and they step back into the dark the moment you finally start paying attention. After a while, I stopped trying to prove anything to myself. That might sound small, but it was the hardest lesson of all. For years, I treated RV camping like a test of endurance. How far I could go, how alone I could be, how much discomfort I could tolerate without flinching. I confused isolation with strength, silence with peace. I thought the goal was to harden myself enough that nothing out there could reach me. That night in the desert stripped that illusion away. Because whatever stood in front of my van wasn't impressed by toughness. It didn't retreat because I was experienced or prepared. It didn't disappear because I told myself I wasn't afraid. It stepped back because something changed in me. Awareness. I started talking about it, carefully, selectively. Other RVers, solo campers, people who'd been out there long enough to know when to listen more than they spoke. And slowly, stories surfaced. Not dramatic ones, not the kind people post online for attention, quiet ones. A woman who woke to her RV rocking gently, like someone leaning their weight against it, only to find no footprints in the morning. A retired couple whose motion lights triggered every night at the same hour, always illuminating nothing. A man who swore his dash cam recorded breathing that didn't belong to him. None of them had clear answers, but every one of them said the same thing in different words. They'd felt it before they saw it. That's what stayed with me. Fear, real fear, doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives as a hesitation, a tightening in your chest, a sense that something is slightly misaligned with the world as you know it. And the tragedy isn't that we feel those things, it's that we've trained ourselves to ignore them. I still camp. I still love the road. I still believe there's something sacred about waking up in a place untouched by noise and routine. But I no longer chase emptiness for its own sake. I choose places where the land feels open, not closed in on itself, where sound travels honestly, where darkness doesn't feel like it's holding its breath. And when something feels off, I leave. No debate, no second guessing. That's the lesson the dash cam gave me. Not that the world is full of threats, but that paying attention is an act of self-respect. The last time the camera caught something was months ago. I was parked near a Forest Service road in northern Arizona, pine country. Cold air, clean, sharp scent of sap and frost. I'd done everything right that night. Early setup, perimeter check, clear lines of sight. At around 2:11 a.m., the camera chirped. Once. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen. There was nothing there, no shadow, no movement, just the empty road and the trees standing still. But this time I noticed something I hadn't before. The sound. A faint shift in the audio. Not a step, not a breath, but the subtle change you hear when something moves closer to a microphone and then decides not to. I didn't wait. I sat up, grounded myself, and listened. Not for it, but to myself. My heart was steady. My thoughts were clear. The fear wasn't sharp anymore. It was informative. I packed up before dawn and drove out as the sky turned pale. Whatever had passed by didn't follow. Maybe it never intended to. Maybe the truth isn't that something out there wants in. Maybe it's that the wilderness reflects back exactly how present you are within it. When you stop listening, it presses closer. When you start paying attention, it backs away. That's the terrifying truth the dash cam revealed. Not an intruder you can point to, but a boundary you're responsible for maintaining. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't mistake silence for safety. Don't mistake bravery for denial. And don't ever ignore the part of you that notices when the world goes quiet in the wrong way. Because the most dangerous moments aren't when something is watching you. They're when you stop watching yourself. And the moment you finally do, the dark steps back.